Okay. So the two examples that we have looked at has two different kinds of symmetries. One symmetry was x going to minus x symmetry, which is kind of a discrete transformation. Either you flip the sign of the coordinate or you don't flip the sign. That is the kind of stuff. Or you flip the sign of the coordinate twice, which is same as not doing anything. Okay. Whereas the second problem where we are studying central force problem in 3 dimensions, in that case you have a continuous transformation, any arbitrary rotation that you could do. Okay, and that is the symmetry of the problem. Okay, so we have two kinds of symmetries in the system, uh, and those two kinds of symmetries are uh, continuous symmetries versus discrete symmetries. Okay, and what we are going to do is we are going to concentrate on continuous symmetries. Okay, so and we are going to restrict ourselves, at least for our discussion. This discussion can be done for classical systems also, but that will take, like, another lecture, so I don't want to do that. So we'll restrict ourselves to quantum mechanical systems. Okay, so if you have a quantum mechanical system, then you associate to that system a state vector in the Hilbert space. Okay, now suppose you are doing a continuous transformation. So one of the continuous transformations that we have just encountered is the rotational symmetry in 3 dimensions. A central force problem has that symmetry. Okay, we have already learned this stuff in first course in quantum mechanics. We also learned this in classical mechanics when we study rigid body problem and so on. Okay, and what we learned there is that there exists a rotation matrix which can rotate the three-dimensional coordinates, and that rotation matrix is a 3 by 3 matrix, okay, which acts on a column vector x, y, z and gives you a new column vector x prime, y prime, z prime. Okay, and x prime, y prime, z prime values depend upon what are the entries that the 3 by 3 matrix R has. Okay, fine. But when you're doing quantum mechanics, then when you do a space rotation by some matrix R, okay, that is expressed by an in terms of an operator which is called a D matrix actually, okay, which is an operator acting in the Hilbert space, which rotates a state vector to a new state vector, okay, and the state alpha tilde is therefore referred to as the rotated system, okay, describing a rotated system. Okay, so that is what we do. We have done this in QM1 course actually. Okay, now remember D of R is an abstract operator, and we call it a D matrix because we try to use a matrix representation of that, uh, so that we can at least get a picture as to how a D of R acts on a particular state and gives you a new state. Okay. Now, what should be the size of this matrix? Well, formally, since it's an operator, it is an infinite by infinite matrix. But typically, what happens is that this D of R decomposes into block diagonal forms depending upon what is the space in which this alpha lives. Okay. So, if alpha belongs to some finite dimensional subspace, okay, then the D of R would sit only in that finite dimensional and would act only on that finite dimensional space. It would of course act on the other vectors, but that is of no concern because those vectors don't mix with alpha. Okay, so in that sense, D of R could be brought into a block diagonal form. Okay, and the kind of block diagonal form that you would get is something, if you recall Sakurai's book, the front cover of Sakurai's book is actually the block diagonal form of the D matrix. Okay, just formally written as block diagonal pieces. If you just go back and look at Sakurai's book at some point. Okay, so suppose you are looking at a system, some simple system like a spin half system. A spin half system has only two states, okay, up and down states, which are eigenstates of the uh, z component of the angular momentum. And in that case, the dr acting on this system would be just a 2 by 2 matrix. Okay, if it instead you want to look at dr acting on a spin 1 system, then spin 1 system has three projections, 1 0 minus 1, and therefore dr would be a 3 by 3 matrix. Okay, so that is how this representation would look like. But generally, as an operator, we would write down d in this following form, that where j is the angular momentum generator, okay, N is an arbitrary direction about which you do a rotation by angle phi. Okay, then D matrix corresponding to a phi rotation about an axis n is given by this exponential of minus I j dot n upon h bar times phi. Okay. Okay, as usual, I have tried to keep track of h bar in this discussion also, but there is a chance that I may have missed a few missed it at few places. But I please point it out if that is the case. Okay, uh, fine. Now, what we are really interested in is not to look at this D matrix, but we want to look at infinitesimal version of the D matrix. Okay, in other words, D matrices themselves would form what we would call a group. Okay, they have a group transformation property, or they kind of uh, are elements of a particular group. Okay, our interest really is in algebra. We want to study algebra and use the algebra to study the representation theory. Okay, so what we want to do is to actually convert this D into an infinitesimal element. Okay, infinitesimal element would be arrived at by taking phi to be small. So imagine that phi is like, small quantity. So try denoting that as delta phi, say. Then you could expand this exponential and write that as 1 minus j hat dot n hat, sorry, j vector dot n hat upon h bar times delta phi. And then there are terms which are of order delta phi squared, which we can ignore for the time being. And we would say that the first set of non-trivial elements beyond identity element are the elements which generate the corresponding algebra for, of the group to which D belongs to. Okay, so D belongs to a group, and the linear elements would generate the corresponding algebra of that group. Okay, now clearly it's kind of evident if you look at it that it is a J vector which would be the quantities which will be called the generators of the corresponding Lie algebra. Okay, now if you write down an algebra, okay, then of course you need to define a binary operation in the algebra. And in the case of angular momentum algebra, the binary operation is given by the commutator bracket. Okay. Now this is also something we already know. Okay. And the algebra is of the generators is given by this equation JA JB is equal to I H bar epsilon ABC JC. Okay. So, and we have of course used this. We may have, I mean, anybody studied starting with an orbital angular momentum may have used L here instead of J, but nevertheless, this is the algebra. Okay. So let us kind of try to understand how this this algebra could be represented. For example, okay. So let's consider a spin half system. Okay, and by convention for the spin half system, we don't use J, but we use uh, generators to be S. We just call them S. Okay, because we call that as spin generators. Okay, spin half system of course has two states. Okay, up state and down state, and you can use that to write down the three generators Sx, Sy, and Sz in this particular form. Okay, so so Sx involves upspin downspin uh, operator plus downspin upspin type operator. This is the Kedbra kind of projection operator. Okay, this is the symmetric one. The anti-symmetrized one is Sy. Okay, of course, if you anti-symmetrize, then you have to ensure that you have to multiply by factor of uh, I such that Sy is a Hermitian operator. Okay, and Sz is of course up up minus down down. So you can clearly see that when Sz acts on either up or down state, only one of the two will click. If the up clicks, then it gives you an answer h bar by 2. Whereas if down down clicks, that means this state contracts with that, then it gives you minus h bar by 2, which is something we already know. Okay, so this is a kind of form of the generators written directly in terms of the states in the Hilbert space. Okay, now you could write down the D matrix in the operator form uh, using these kind of objects, and you can write that as exponential of sz for the z component of the D matrix, okay, to be minus I sz upon h bar times phi, okay, and as usual the rotated state would be just dz phi acting on the original state, okay. That original state could be any of these two, or it could be a linear combination of those two, and so on, okay, fine. So we just saw that, like, that you could in principle write down a D matrix. Remember, this up down actually would form a column vector, right? uh, Two component column vector, up and down kind of states, okay. So these sx, sy, xz should essentially behave like 2 by 2 matrices, okay, acting on that column vector. And so once you think about that, then you can clearly see the entries out here are really entries of a 2 by 2 matrix. This is off diagonal 1 1, whereas this is off diagonal I minus I, okay, whereas this is diagonal 1 minus 1, okay. So we already know those are polymatrices. So we kind of realize Sx, Sy, and Sz could be written in terms of polymatrices: 0 1 1 0, 0 minus I 0, and 1 minus 1 diagonally. Okay, fine. So what you could do therefore is replace this Sz, or generically any S dot n hat, by appropriate polymatrix vector contracted with that n hat vector about which you are trying to do the rotation. Okay, so for dz, of course, you would just be writing down sigma 3 simply because you have picked up sz, and one particular direction has been already kind of decided as, okay, fine. Now we know the properties of polymatrices, that polymatrices are Hermitian. So if you write down e to the Hermitian matrix, then we know that the exponential of Hermitian matrix behaves like a unitary matrix. Okay, so therefore these D matrices that we have written down, okay, have the property that they are unitary. That means if you take a dagger of them, okay, D dagger is equal to D inverse. Okay, so what we have actually obtained is a unitary representation of the rotation group in 3 space-time dimension, okay, acting on a two-dimensional Hilbert space. Okay, now the two-dimensional Hilbert space, simply because we have picked up a particular representation. If you just wrote it as an abstract operator like J vector, then of course it's an infinite by infinite matrix. Okay, but what we have obtained is a unitary 2 by 2 matrices whose determinant is 1. Why is the determinant 1? Simply because if you look at these matrices, the uh, the sigma matrices of course have a property that, okay, you could kind of try expanding that into cos phi plus I times sigma dot n times sine phi, and try to compute the determinant if you wish. Okay, but you can check that the determinant is 1. Okay, so what you find is that you have unit determinant unitary 2 by 2 unitary matrices. Okay, and that group, remember, these were the elements of group, and infinitesimal version of D contain the elements of Lie algebra. Okay, so 2 by 2 unitary matrices with unit determinant, that group is called a Lie group with name SU2. Okay, this SU2 is of course a nomenclature where it says this 2 stands for 2 by 2 matrices, U stands for them being unitary, and S stands for special unitary, implying that the determinant of these matrices is 1. Okay, you could also have a kind of minus 1 determinant, for example. Okay, fine. Okay, so what we would be doing, as I said some time ago, would be concentrating only on the infinitesimal elements of the groups, which, in other words, we would be looking at the algebra. Okay, so instead of looking at the Lie group SU2, we would really be looking at Lie algebra SU2. Okay, so this is a general convention in mathematics that if you write down a group as, say, capital G, then algebra will be written as small g. If you call a group capital SU2, then you write algebra as small SU2. This is just pure convention. Okay. So if whenever I write down SU2 with small letters, it is implied that I'm talking about algebra, okay, and not about group. Okay. Okay, so any questions here? This is mostly something you should know from the angular momentum algebra, but nevertheless. Okay, so let's kind of define the Lie algebra. So Lie algebra is a vector space V with a binary operation, that means operation from V cross V to V, which is denoted by xy going to commutator of xy. Okay, this is, of course, in physics we call this a commutator bracket, but of course Lie algebra predates quantum mechanics, so this was initially called the, well, and even now it is called the Lie bracket. Okay, so sometimes uh, we would use word Lie bracket while talking about a commutator like this. Okay, so a Lie algebra is a vector space with a binary operation that if you are given two elements of the vector space, then it maps to a new element, which is the Lie bracket of those two elements. Okay, this vector space with binary operation is called a Lie algebra if it satisfies the following three conditions. First of all, if the bracket is bilinear. Okay, so when you write down this bracket, it is if you take x going to lambda times x, then this bracket is lambda times the Lie bracket of x and y. If it take y going to say sigma times y, then this bracket is sigma times Lie bracket of x with y. Okay. So in that sense, the quantity appearing inside the bracket is actually linear with respect to both these arguments. Okay, so that's what one means by bilinear. Okay, the second property is that it is antisymmetric. That means if you take two elements to be identical, it would just vanish. Okay, and this is true for every element in the vector space. And the third property that it satisfies is the following double commutator or double Lie bracket, which is x with yz plus y with zx plus z with xy is equal to 0. This is something we already know. It's called the Jacobi identity. Okay. So if you have a vector space with a binary operation like this, satisfying these three conditions, then you would say that that vector space gives you Lie algebra. Okay. Is the definition clear?
So is that the usual definition of how we define Lie algebra?
Yes. You can see this definition in Humphrey's book called Lie algebra and representation theory. In fact, this is
Whose book?
Humphrey's.
Humphrey. Okay.
Yeah. So this is how mathematicians would define it. In fact, this is the definition of Lie algebra. In fact. Okay. Any other
So
question? Yes.
this Lie algebra in general, does it the first condition xx is 0?
Yeah.
Does it also determine that the commutator be anti and what do we call it, antisymmetric under exchange of x and y?
Yeah. So yeah, true. So this statement tells you that it has. I mean, that the bracket has to have a property that when you write it in, see there are two conditions. No, one is that it is bilinear, okay, and the second condition that x is equal to 0. Okay.
Yeah.
If you take these two together, it will tell you that it is antisymmetric in its arguments.
So then the third condition is, does it not just the Jacobi identity, can it not be derived simply from antisymmetry?
No, no.
Is it okay?
Jacobi identity is like a derivation. Okay, derivation in the following sense that you look at this equation and do the following thing. Okay, you write down first entry on the left hand side and take the last two entries on the right hand side.
Yeah.
Okay, now when you take them on the right hand side, they will have minus sign. Okay, right?
Yeah.
This is equal to minus of the other two quantity. Okay. Now you do the following thing. You swap x and z. Okay.
Hmm.
And you swap this z with this bracket. Okay. Then what you would see is that the bracket with respect to x acts like a derivative. Okay. You imagine bracket with x acting on this yz bracket. Imagine that as a derivative. Then that derivative first acts on y, which will give you this term, and the derivative doesn't act on y but acts on z, that will give you this term. Okay. So
Okay.
Jacobi identity is a statement that you can define a derivation with respect to a binary operation on a vector space. Okay. Which is
I mean,
which is not
like,
which is not good enough. I mean, which is not easy to kind of say that like only commutator relation is good enough to get this answer.
in general, like when we prove Jacobi identity, like the terms simply cancel. That's why I was thinking about that.
No, that is
Okay.
true. That is true because you are looking at simple algebras. You could write
Yeah.
down a complicated algebra, in which case such a thing wouldn't happen actually.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, not all the algebra. I mean, not all algebras that you would define with this kind of relation would necessarily close.
Mhm.
Okay, in fact, like even I mean, okay, how do I say? Like uh, right now I have not mentioned something, but these are finite dimensional Lie algebras. Okay, if you make infinite dimensional Lie algebras, then you may have some additional constraints coming up, and in that case, you really have to show that the bracket actually cancels. Okay, eventually it does, but like it is not obvious that it would always happen. Like for example, uh, uh, yeah, maybe I go back a little. That if you look at this commutation relation, okay, you may have in the infinite dimensional algebra, you may have this piece plus an additional piece. Okay, so and that additional piece is inhomogeneous. That means it's not a function of j. Okay, and in that case, it is not a priori guaranteed that the algebra would close. Okay, there exist certain cases in which the algebra closes. Okay, which is that set of algebras are uh, called extensions affine, are called affine Lie algebras. In other cases, it doesn't close. They are not called Lie algebras. Okay, but those algebras could be, you could still work with them, but they are not Lie algebras. Okay. Finite dimensional algebra, yes, you write these terms out explicitly, they would just vanish. Yeah, that I agree. Okay.
I'm still confused. Like, what is this denotion? Like x comma y bracket going to commutator bracket.
Yeah. Yeah. So binary operation means you take one element from here and one element from there. Okay, which is taking
Yeah.
x and y. And the binary operation takes one element each and gives you a new element in V itself. That new element is the Lie bracket.
Yeah, it's not the commutator bracket, right? It's not xy minus yx or something.
Well, it is a commutator bracket in most of the finite dimensional Lie algebras, but all it is trying to say is that like you could write down a bilinear bracket. Okay. In the case of finite dimensional Lie algebras, it is a commutator bracket, in fact.
Can we not create other such bilinear functional?
It is possible, yeah. Yeah. There are various other kinds of brackets also. Okay.
Yeah, and
But
even those are called Lie brackets.
not really, actually. There are different names. There, yeah, I mean, like you can write down variety of brackets, but like not all of them generate Lie algebras.
No, I'm saying,
Yeah,
is the
antisymmetric.
commutator
Yeah.
bracket only such functional between between two elements of the vector space, which gives us an algebra?
That is right. For Lie algebra.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, is it the only one, the
Yes.
commutator bracket?
Yes. So if you are
Oh,
looking at finite dimensional Lie algebra, yes.
I mean, it's not easy to see though, right?
No, it is because if you consider these two conditions, that the bracket should be bilinear and the xx should be 0, it is a commutator. Okay. In fact, you can prove it.
Okay.
Okay, so
It need not be, right? Generally, if we say take two vectors in R3,
yeah,
then the fact that Lie algebra is bilinear and XX anti-commute does not give you like a Lie algebra. Like let's
no,
say
no,
you're
they don't
taking cross
anti-commute.
product.
They don't anti-commute. They commute.
Oh, sorry, they commute.
Yeah.
So take two vectors A and B.
Yeah.
You can define A cross B, which is bilinear,
Yeah.
and A cross A is 0.
Yeah.
But that will not give you Lie algebra.
No, A cross B is anti-symmetric, right? It is
Yeah,
like a
it is
commutator.
antisymmetric,
It is like a commutator.
but it will not satisfy Jacobi identity.
It will not satisfy.
No, it
This
does, right?
cross product,
Yeah.
that will not satisfy Jacobi identity.
Yeah, that is right.
So like that is not a Lie algebra, right? It does not become an anti-commutator.
It does not become.
It
Sorry.
does not it does not become something like AB minus BA.
No, it does. No, I mean, if you.
Had it become AB minus BA, we could have proved Jacobi identity.
Yeah. So okay, I need to check. I mean, but I think that Jacobi identity should have worked with this. Why is the Jacobi not working with cross product?
It's-
It does
Pi
work.
cross Z, X cross pi cross Z is oh,
It would
okay.
work.
It does work.
It is,
Yeah.
it is
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
valid.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Fine.
Okay. Any other question?
No, I was saying, like, for example, A cross B is one example where, I mean, it looks like it is a commutator, but why are we calling it a commutator?
No, no, you don't have to. Yeah, so I agree that you could write it in a different formulation, but you could show that it can be brought down to a commutator form. Okay, so what I'm trying to say that there exists one representation of Lie bracket which is like this, but you can define kind of this binary operation of Lie bracket in various different ways. You can write that in a differential form instead of kind of matrix form that one would want to do here. Okay, but eventual point is that it is antisymmetric. Okay, this product is antisymmetric. Whether you write it in terms of differential operators, whether you write it in terms of matrices, it doesn't matter. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so so I want to start with considering two sets of angular momentum generators, and I want to call them J1 and J2. The reason why I want to start with two sets is because I would assume that single set of angular momentum you would have done in quantum mechanics already. In fact, two sets also you have done, but nevertheless, I just want to start there. Okay, so we are looking at two sets of generators. You may want to call it L and S if you kind of think of it as a problem in quantum mechanics, but yeah, it doesn't matter. Okay, now one important point is that I want to kind of emphasize here is that like they have the same transformation property. In this example, they have the same transformation property with respect to all space-time transformations. Sorry, not space-time, all spatial transformations. So which includes not only rotations, but even reflection. So if you look at transformation like x vector going to minus x vector, both J1 and J2 transform in the same fashion. Okay, and we know that the angular momentum generators transform like what are called pseudo vectors. That means under x vector going to minus x vector, ordinary vector would change sign. Okay, whereas a pseudo vector wouldn't change sign. Okay, and angular momentum generators transform like pseudo vectors in 3 dimensions. They don't change sign. Okay, so I want to choose J1 and J2 both to have the same property, namely both of them are pseudo vectors with respect to 3-dimensional transformations, which include rotations as well as discrete transformations. The commutation relation between them, or the Lie bracket if you want to use the word.
Sir,
Yes.
so I don't understand the word angular momentum generator. It is the rotation generator, or I mean, it should
Okay.
be rotation generator, right?
I mean, it's again a word, right? I mean, if you want to use the word rotation, you can call it. Angular momentum is a word which is used in quantum mechanics. So, and it generates, I mean, it generates the rotation of space, but it is related to, it counts the angular momentum of the state, right? It measures the angular momentum of the states.
So J1 and J2 are the angular momentum, right?
Yeah, I mean, okay, we are arguing about its semantics. If you want to call it rotation generators, you can call them rotation generator. It doesn't matter really. But the thing that I'm looking at is that they are operators which are acting on the Hilbert space. They are not the R matrices which rotate XYZ coordinate system. Okay, let's go back a little and see R matrix. Okay, yeah, R matrix is the one which rotates the vector in space. Okay, whereas D matrix rotates a vector in Hilbert space. Okay, it is this D matrix that we write in terms of J's. Okay, and the J's generate an algebra which is referred to as angular momentum algebra. Okay, whereas R matrices generate an algebra which is called a rotation algebra. Okay, now it is purely a nomenclature. If you want to call this rotation algebra, so be it. Okay, but since in quantum mechanics we call it angular momentum algebra, I will rather stick to that notation. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think yeah. Fine. So I am looking at two angular momentum generators. Angular momentum algebra is generated by J1, which is Jx, Jy, Jz, and J2, which I mean J1 is J1 by J1z, and J2 is J2 by J2z, and they satisfy these commutational relations. This is something we know. If you think of this as L and this as S, you would see the same relation, and they commute with each other. Okay. Which just means that J1 and J2 are acting on two different Hilbert spaces. Okay, exactly the way orbital and spin angular momenta would act. Okay, but as I said, they would transform on in the same manner under three-dimensional transformations. I shouldn't call it rotation, three-dimensional transformations in general, which could also allow discrete transformations. Okay. So if you have these two kind of generators, then you can construct a new total angular momentum generator, which is what we call J, and that in quantum mechanics we just write as L plus S. But L plus S is a bit of a kind of sloppy notation, simply because L acts on one Hilbert space, S acts on a different Hilbert space, and you don't really add those generators in a simple way like that, but you actually write them in this fashion, that J1 acts on first Hilbert space, one acts on the second, plus one acts on the first Hilbert space, and J2 acts on the second. Okay, that is how you construct the new total angular momentum. Okay, now of course, practically what you do is exactly what you do in quantum mechanics, but to write it in a correct fashion, this is what you would have done. Okay, fine. So what we do is, depending upon which side of this equation that you are interested in, or which side of this equation you want to utilize, you would either use a basis which is J1, J2, M1, M2, which is like the right hand side basis, or J1, J2, Jm, which is the left hand side basis. Okay, so what you do is that you look at these two Hilbert spaces on which J1 and J2 act, and you write down a new basis, okay, on which either the right hand side acts nicely or the left hand side acts nicely. Okay, fine. So one of the exercises that we do in quantum mechanics is yes.
Please explain the J is equal to J1 cross 1 plus 1 cross J2.
Yeah. So all I was saying was that J1 acts on has its own Hilbert space. J2 has its own Hilbert space. Okay. So J1 acts on Hilbert space, which is different from J2 Hilbert space. Okay. So if you want to construct a total angular momentum operator, okay, then in the original basis, J1 is acting on one Hilbert space, let's call it H1, but not acting on H2. And J2 is acting on H2, but not acting on H1. Okay, so that is why total angular momentum is written in this particular piece, where the right-hand side acts on H1 and H2. Left-hand side acts on a new basis in the Hilbert space, in which H1 and H2 of course get mixed. Okay, and is that clear?
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so what happens is that, like, when you write on a new basis in which J1, J2, J and M act, then those number of vectors in that Hilbert space is same as the number of vectors in the original Hilbert space. And one of the things that we do in quantum mechanics is to show that there exists a change of basis, and that change of basis from this choice to this choice is written in terms of what are called the Clebsch-Gordon coefficient. Okay, so sometimes you can evaluate those Clebsch-Gordon coefficients in a simple way. Okay, particularly for the angular momentum algebra, you know Clebsch-Gordon coefficient for all values of j's. Okay, fine. So now, of course, if you look at the system from the right hand side representation, then you know that typically, if you are looking at a Hilbert space with angular momentum value small j1, then it has 2j plus 1 components. If you look at small j2, then that would have 2j plus 2, 2j2 plus 1 components. Okay, so the combined Hilbert space would have a product of these two numbers, that many states available. Okay, and as I said, in whether you choose this basis or that basis is irrelevant. You need to show that total number of states are still the same. Okay, now when you combine these angular momenta, okay, you typically find that this representation is not a irreducible representation. Okay, in fact, this representation can be decomposed into smaller representations, and the smaller representations are irreducible. That means they cannot be made written in terms of representations smaller than them. Okay, of course, whatever irreducible representations you have, the dimensionality of those irreducible representations should add up to this number. Okay, so that is of course the constraint on the system. Okay, fine. So for example, if you consider a system where you added the angular momenta with one system has half angular momentum, the other has one, then that setup could combine into a spin 3/2 representation and a spin 1/2 representation. And what you need to show basically, which is what you would have done in quantum mechanics, is that total number of states here is same as total number of states here. Okay, fine. Now we have to find ways of labeling the representations. So what we do is we define what is called the Casimir operator, which is called j squared, which is jx squared plus jy squared plus jz squared. And this operator acting on any representation returns you a specific number, which is, if the representation is j dimensional, then it's called this capital J gives you small j into small j plus 1 as an eigenvalue. Okay, and that is the one which will allow you to label the representation using the small j value. Okay, and we of course know what these values are. They take positive semi-definite half integral values, which is 0, half, 1, 3 half, 2, 5 half, and so on. Okay, so this is something we already know. Okay, so let's now try to do the following thing. Instead of doing whatever we did just now, we consider again two copies of angular momenta, and I want to call them J and K now. And unlike the previous case where both the generators transformed in the same fashion under all spatial transformations, in this case we want these generators to transform differently under all spatial transformations. Nevertheless, the algebra that they satisfy is same, namely JA with JB is I epsilon ABC JC, K with KB is I epsilon ABC KC, and JA with KB is equal to 0. Okay, this is pretty much what we did with J1 and J2 also. Okay, like that. Okay, but the difference now is that this transformation property tells you that under continuous transformations, namely rotations in three-dimensional space, both J and K transform in the same fashion. Okay, but under discrete transformation, they transform differently. Okay, so how do they transform? So we had assumed that J1 and J2 transform like pseudo vectors. Okay, under three-dimensional parity transformation, that means they don't flip sign. Whereas we'll assume in this example that J transforms like a pseudo vector, but K transforms like a vector. Okay. So remember, we are doing a three-dimensional parity transformation, and we are saying that J transforms like a pseudo vector, but K transforms like a vector. That means K would flip side. Okay, fine. That they would transform in the same fashion under rotation is kind of part of the statement of the algebra. Okay, fine. Now, given that this algebra has a property that J commutes with K, that means you can simultaneously diagonalize generators in J and generators in K without worrying about what basis you choose in J generators and what basis you use in K generators. Okay, this commutator tells you that these guys are do not talk to each other, so you can choose whatever you want. Fine. But suppose you are looking at representations of J, okay, then you might as well forget about existence of K, because Ks are not actually going to affect what representations the JA, JB is equal to I epsilon ABC JC algebra would have. Okay, fine. But we know what JA, JB because I epsilon ABC JC would give, right? That is something we just wrote down right here. Okay, since this is a SU2 algebra, its representations are known. Spin 0, spin half, spin 1, spin 3 half, spin 2, spin 5 half, dot, dot, dot. Okay, just jumping by half integral values. Okay.
So why are you calling it SU2?
These ones? Because we show that the representations can be written in terms of polymatrices, right?
Yeah. I thought SU2 means these unitary vectors, unitary operators are acting on two-dimensional Hilbert space.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but if you are increasing this angular momentum values, then the Hilbert space dimension is also changing, right?
That is right. Yeah, but you can do tensor products of the representations. No, that is always possible. Okay.
Yeah, but let's say you can decompose. Let's say you're doing the algebra on spin 3/2.
Yeah.
So how can you decompose it?
Well, you can think of that as a symmetric tensor product of three spin half representations. Okay.
Okay.
So that is,
So
yeah.
Yeah, would you scroll a little above?
Sorry.
Would you scroll a little? Yeah.
Further up?
Yeah.
You tell me where to stop.
Yeah, it's this fine.
Yeah.
So like, hello, yeah.
Yes,
So
yes.
get some chronology in order. We
Yeah.
have some, operator R, which is some sort of a symmetry of space or something. It's rotating space itself.
Yes.
And D of R is the operator that acts on the Hilbert space
Exactly.
of the state we are considering.
Exactly.
Now to write D of R, we need some sort of a generator.
That is right.
Which are our J's in the angular momentum case.
Yes.
Why are we saying that the J's transform under three-dimensional space rotation? Like, why are we using that language? I'm not understanding that. Are we saying when we rotate, the J's themselves change?
Yeah. Well, like, if you do a rotation, then J themselves would change, of course.
I mean, the generators are fixed when you have the algebra already known, right? Like, for instance, in spin 2 case, we already know the Pauli matrices, right?
Yeah.
You don't say that the Pauli
Spin
matrices
half.
transform.
No. So the thing is the following, that the reason why we don't do that is this is also something you must have done in quantum mechanics. Okay. See, suppose you do a rigid body problem in classical mechanics. Okay. Then what you do is that you define a lap fixed frame and you define a body fixed frame, okay, with a rigid body. Now you can do the following thing. You can rotate the lap fixed frame any which way you want, okay, such that you can orient lap fixed frame with the body fixed frame, okay.
Yes.
That would require you to do what are called Euler angle rotations, okay.
Yeah.
Now you could have done the other way around also. You could have kept the lap frame fixed and you could have rotated the body fixed frame, doing the Euler angle rotations, okay, such that it is brought to the lap fixed frame form, okay. You could have done it in any which way, okay.
Yeah.
In quantum mechanics you can't do this, okay. In quantum mechanics there exists a body fixed frame and there is a lap fixed frame, okay. The body fixed frame you cannot fiddle with. You don't even know in which direction the z component of spin is pointing, okay.
That's right. Yeah.
So therefore what you do is that you assign sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3 as xyz components of the spin generators with respect to body fixed frame and never play with them, okay.
Yes.
So that is the reason why you have make a assignment like this, okay. But you could have chosen, if you wished, you could have chosen sigma y to be diagonal, okay, and it would have been perfectly okay, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so to get sigma y being diagonal would require just doing a rotation among the generators, right? That we do not do in quantum mechanics is because we want to hold because we do not know what is happening with the body fixed frame. And therefore, if you remember how the Euler angle rotation is done in quantum mechanics, it's quite different from the way you do it in classical mechanics, in the sense that like you do not even talk about what is the orientation in the body fixed frame because there is no observation being done there. You do all the rotation with respect to lap fixed frame. Okay. So that is the reason why you do not play around with polymetrics saying that like, sigma z is 1 minus 1 diagonal and sigma x is 1 off diagonal. Okay. So in fact, that is what we will also do. So, but what I'm trying to say is that like with those fixed elements as generators, they would tell you how a system rotates with respect to a lap fixed frame.
Yes, and the Pauli matrices will be given as you have on the screen.
Exactly. Yes, and you don't touch them actually.
Yeah. So in D, if just a little below, so R is characterized by n cap and phi.
Yes.
In 3 dimensions.
Yes.
So with an axis and the amount of rotation.
Exactly.
So D is fixed with that n cap and phi. Only that information is what is required for rotating a frame. Here sigma vector is fixed.
You try to hold sigma vector fixed. Yeah.
Yeah. So similarly, in a higher dimensional representation, it would be j vector dot n cap.
Yes, but j vector is still 3 component, even if the representation is higher dimensional.
Yeah.
So given that there are only 3 generators, that is the statement about it being a SU2 algebra. SU2 algebra is exactly 3 generators, which are
It is for a 2x2 system. Let's say we have a 3x3 system.
Yeah.
For which the generators are some Ji.
Yeah. Then there are three 3x3 matrices.
Yeah, and we'll keep those J's fixed, right?
Yeah. Those J's also will be kept fixed.
And those J's are the ones we are talking about right now that add as J1 cross 1 plus 1 cross J2.
No. The J's that we are talking about are totally abstract. I don't even worry about what is the representation. These ones that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. Right now they are abstract. As soon as you take this example, then yes. Then J's here are 2x2 matrices, J here are 3x3 matrices.
Yeah. So if you go a little above, you have written something like J1 and J2 act on 2 different Hilbert space, that is fine, but transform in the same manner. I'm saying that they are fixed matrices. We aren't considering their transformation as such.
Yeah. But when I say transform, I mean the following. Okay. So if you think of them in the matrix form, we keep the matrix form fixed. But suppose you think of J1 as say orbital angular momentum generator. Okay. then the z component of that would be written as x del del y minus y del del x.
Yes.
Okay. So that fellow under three-dimensional rotations, actually I did not mean rotation, as I said, I want to talk about all transformations. But under three-dimensional rotation, if you do transformation which rotates x, y, z into each other, okay, this component will actually rotate. Okay.
Yeah.
So there is nothing wrong with that. That would happen. In fact, like, I skipped something from my notes. I should, if I had not skipped, it would have been probably useful. Okay. Hold on, let me just step back and tell you what it does. So for example, if you take, let's go back a little. Okay. Suppose you take a representation like this. Okay.
Yeah.
And suppose you look at the operator Sx. Okay.
Okay.
Now you want to ask the following question, that I want to look at the operator Sx, but I want to find out what is its expectation value. Okay. Is it
Yeah.
fine? So you sandwich that between two states, say alpha Sx alpha. Okay.
Yes.
But then I know that I can do a rotation which takes me from the state alpha to a state alpha tilde by D matrix. Okay.
Yeah.
So you could do that transformation. Okay. And you convert the expectation value of Sx to expectation value of Sx tilde computed in alpha tilde space. Okay.
Okay.
But that statement corresponds to just introducing D and D dagger between alpha states, right? Because imagine alpha tilde Sx and the bra alpha tilde, okay,
Yeah.
is equal to alpha D dagger
Exactly.
Sx D alpha, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So now imagine that you are doing a transformation, say this alpha and alpha tilde are related by a transformation where you do a rotation about, say, z axis. Okay. Instead of writing the most general D matrix, let's say write down dz. Okay. So
Yeah.
dz
Okay.
was written somewhere here, or maybe downstairs.
Down below.
Yeah. Suppose you look at this, then what you get is that
Yes.
then between the new alpha state, there is a D dagger Sx D sandwiched in between. That is same as exponential I Sz by h bar phi, then Sx e to the minus I Sz by h bar phi, sandwiched between alpha states. Okay.
Yes.
So now what you can do is that you can just write down Sx in this form. Okay. Use Sz in this form in the exponent and compute action of exponential I s bar I Sz phi on the state Sx from left, and action of this operator from the right. Okay. And if you compute that, then what the answer that you would get would be expectation value of Sx times cos phi minus expectation value of Sy times sin phi. Okay.
Yeah.
Which
And
tells you
that you
that
are calling the transformation of Sx.
exactly. Yeah. So it is in the expectation value sense only that you can make sense of it, because you do not say that the operator transforms, but operator expectation value transforms. Okay.
So this is similar to like either transforming the state or transforming an operator, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
we could
Yes.
do D dagger Sx D, or we could do D of phi.
Exactly. Yeah. So that is what Kaustubh was saying was that, like, since we use the fixed operators, we transform the state.
Then we should like operate on phi.
Exactly. So this is like almost like Schrodinger versus Heisenberg picture.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and we just choose the operator to be fixed. That's like working in Schrodinger picture. Then you change the states. Okay.
Yeah.
And it is convenient simply because once you define operators, you have defined them once and for all. You allow the states to rotate, but keep the operators fixed. So there is no confusion about I mean, that you choose sigma 3 as diagonal and somebody chooses somebody else to be diagonal, confusion wouldn't occur. I mean, it's almost that. It really boils down to that.
Yeah, and one thing, where you wrote J equals J1 plus J2,
Yes, maybe just
that
let me
was
go down.
still some of,
Oh, maybe I jumped way ahead. Yeah, here.
yeah, J1 and J2 are still generators of rotation, right?
Yes.
And J corresponds to some generator of rotation after we add them.
Yeah, total system.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So the thing is that, like, sometimes this basis would be useful. Sometimes this basis will be useful. This is something we have done in quantum mechanics, right?
Mhm.
LSJM basis is useful sometimes. LSMLMS basis is good in some other cases, right? But
Yeah,
the statement that I wanted to make was that if you do addition of angular momenta this way, okay, the dimensionality of the Hilbert space doesn't change. Okay, it may be decomposed as 2J1 plus 1 times 2J2 plus 1, or it may be decomposed into different kind of factors and the sum of those different factors, but total number is still the same. That's all I wanted to say.
yeah, fine.
Okay. Okay. So can we go ahead?
Sir,
Yes.
J, when you say J is J is not a J is a pseudo vector
Yeah.
and K is not, then under parity the commutator of K will not change sign, and so with J, but the right hand side, I mean, this commutator relation for J will preserve and not for K,
Which
because
one?
K, yeah, here the
Yeah.
second relation
Yeah.
under parity, left hand side is always same, but the right hand side for K will change sign.
Yeah.
So that would mean that this is commuting K for K.
No, 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 no. That's not what it means, actually. So what one is trying to do is you are trying to do a parity transformation on this, okay? And under the parity transformation, um, yeah, how does it go?
If it is behaving as pseudo vector, then if you are changing K, let's say K, A to K minus A and K B to K minus B,
Yeah,
then it should become K minus C on the right hand side.
yeah, yeah.
And
So
that should give you extra minus sign.
yeah, so I think I'll give no, no, I'll give you a representation in which this will work. So just hold on, actually. Okay. So I'll tell you how this is happening, so that it will
No, I
become
didn't
clear.
get the issue. These are generators of only the SU2 part, right? Not for the parity transform part.
Yeah, this is not the parity transform part.
So
Yeah.
performing a parity transformation here and the result not matching is like not really
Is
useful,
not a
right?
problem. That's what we'll see in a moment, actually. Okay. So if you go ahead a little, you'll see what is going on. I mean, I'm arriving at something using this algebra, so we'll see in a moment. Okay. So yeah. So but the point that I wanted to make was that given that these algebras commute with each other, okay, implies that the total representation theory involving these two sets of generators, okay, are two independent SU2 algebras, and therefore the representations of this full algebra would be written just by ordered pair, and every element of this ordered pair takes positive semi-definite half integral values. Okay, that means rho and sigma are 0, half, 1, 3 half, and so on. Okay, so in other words, if you take an algebra of this kind and you want to ask how do I classify representations, we have already done the classification of representation of SU2 algebra. See, when we did quantum mechanics, we didn't probably use the word SU2, but it was angular momentum algebra. But representations were typically half integral, positive numbers, half integral. Starts with 0, which is trivial representation, which doesn't transform under rotation. Then spin half, spin 1, spin 3 half, and so on. Okay. Now we are looking at algebra in which we have two such fellows, and they commute with each other. So therefore, they are independently labeled by the same set. Okay. So therefore, representation theory of this algebra would be something like this. It would have a trivial representation which we will call 0, 0. Okay, which is spin 0 representation of every SU2 algebra, and therefore it neither transforms under J nor transforms under K. Okay, so which is called a trivial representation or identity representation, depending upon which book you open. Then comes the set of non-trivial representations. So one of them is something like half 0, whereas you could all, which transforms under J but not under K. 0 half is transformed under K but not under J, and a half half which transforms like a spin half under J and a spin half under K. Okay. Now, and by and so on, I mean you could write down 0 1 1 0 half 1 1 half, all kinds of stuff. It's ad infinitum. Okay. Exactly the way SU2 had infinite number of representations, this algebra also would have infinite number of representations. Okay. Is that fine? Is this okay? I hope I'm connected.
Yeah, you are.
Oh yeah. Okay. Thanks. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, but please let me know if I'm going fast here. All I'm trying to say is that we are looking at an algebra of 6 generators, but these 6 generators have a property that 3 generators transform into each other, 3 other generators transform into each other, and these 2 sets of 3 generators don't talk to each other. All these 3 generators, both these sets transform like an SU2 algebra, and therefore SU2 representation theory is a full representation theory with respect to every set. So the total representation theory therefore should be ordered pair, one corresponding to J, one corresponding to K. Okay. And since we know SU2 representation theory already, we just write down all kinds of allowed values and say that all those allowed values are representations of this algebra. Okay. So let's go ahead a little and then we'll see what is happening. Okay. So let's now consider linear combinations of the J and K generators. Okay. So let's call them M and N. Now you may think that I'm unnecessarily messing up the whole stuff, but we'll see in a moment why this set of generators are little more physically clear than the J and K generators. So suppose you write down MA to be JA plus KA and NA to be JA minus K. Then using the commutation relation that we had just a couple of slides back, namely this, use that relation, compute the commutator of M with M, M with N, and N with N, and use the JK commutation relation, you find that this is the answer. Okay. Notice that all the commutators are non-zero, first thing. Second thing is that M with M gives you M. That is like a closed algebra. But N with N gives you M. Okay, so N doesn't form a closed algebra. It requires M. Without that, it wouldn't close. Okay, and M with N gives you N. Okay, so therefore, if you set N to 0, okay, that is a complete algebra in terms of capital M. Okay, that makes sense. But if you set M to 0, then that is not a sensible algebra, because then NA with NB would just vanish. Okay, so therefore, of course, I mean, that is also an algebra, but not interesting algebra. It's what's called an abelian algebra. Okay, but non-trivial SU2 algebra of this kind, okay, exists only in M and is not immediately apparent in N. Although in J and K basis, they were 2 SU2 algebras. In M and N basis, you don't see them so absolutely clearly. Okay, but you do see one SU2 quite clearly. Okay, now let's do the matrix representation of this. Okay, this is the 3x3 rotation representation. Okay, and if you want to write down 3x3 generators, these are 3x3 analogs of polymatrices really. Okay, if you want to take the spin 1 representation and want to rotate, this is how the infinitesimal rotations would work out. Okay, but we have 6 generators, so we cannot use this form. We need 4 by 4 matrices. Okay, and these m's and n's generate rotations in 4-dimensional Euclidean space. Okay, so let's kind of figure this out. So they are ugly looking matrices, but nevertheless, just bear with me. Okay, so now first thing that I should mention is that, like, the statements that we make about rotations typically are true only in 3 dimensions. Namely, when we say that, like, rotation about z axis, okay, which corresponds to actually rotation in xy plane. That's what we actually want to say, but we say rotation about z axis, okay, which is true in 3 dimensions. Nothing wrong in this statement in 3 dimensions, okay. But the best way to represent rotations in arbitrary dimensions is to talk about rotations in planes, okay. So suppose you are in 4 dimensions, then you can ask how many independent rotations you can make. In 3 dimensions, how many independent rotations you can make? Rotation of xy plane, rotation of yz plane, and a rotation of xz plane, 3. Okay, and those 3 are the generators that we wrote down, and they were interpreted as a rotation about z axis, x axis, and y axis respectively. Okay, but in higher dimension it wouldn't work this way, so it is best to define rotations as rotations of a plane. Okay, now suppose you are in 4 dimensions, w, x, y, z are the 4 coordinates. Then the total number of rotations that you can do is choose 2 coordinates, choose a plane out of these 4. So you have to choose 2 out of 4. So 4C2 gives you 6, and therefore you would need 6 generators. Okay, and these m and n's are these 6 generators. So you look at m1, it rotates only these 2 coordinates. Okay, so suppose they are called w, x, y, z, then it is a rotation in yz plane. This is a rotation in xz plane. This is a rotation in xy plane. Okay, this is a rotation in wx plane. This is in wy, and this is in wz. Okay, so therefore J and K was a good basis for doing the representation theory, but M and N is a good basis to understand what is these 6 generators actually doing. Those 6 generators that we are written down were actually doing rotations in 4-dimensional space. Now, let's restrict to this lower 3-dimensional subspace of this space, okay, which is the XYZ coordinate system. In XYZ coordinate system, if you do a transformation, okay, then a transformation in XYZ coordinate system generated by a rotation matrix, that rotation matrix would be a pseudo vector. But a transformation which involves W with any one of these coordinates, okay, W does not change sign under the 3-dimensional parity transformation. So therefore, if you write down W del del X minus X del del W, this vector will change sign, because W doesn't change sign, but X changes sign. So therefore, those generators behave like vectors in 3 dimensions, whereas these lower 3 by 3 component of these matrices, okay, where M1, M2, and M3 belong, they behave like pseudo vector, like angular momentum algebra. Okay, so the Ks are actually representations of the transformations which involves mixing of W coordinate with XYZ coordinate. Okay, so that is the property that kind of distinguishes the J's from K's. Okay, so what we have done basically by changing this basis is to write down J and K generators in terms of M and N generators, where M and N generators are actually generators of rotation in 4 dimensions. Okay, is it making sense?
Now, would you solve it?
Sorry.
Parity transformation means in matrices multiplying some terms by -1.
Yeah.
In particular, here the XYZ components.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Here the rotations are having by 90 degrees.
No,
In
no,
the
no, no, no. These are, sorry.
The M N that you showed, those
Yeah.
were 90-degree rotations.
No, 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 no. These are the infinitesimal transformations. There is a epsilon sitting in front of these, or delta phi sitting in front of it. It's a small rotation. These are just generators.
Okay, yes.
So for example, if you suppose you look at this 2 by 2 matrix, lower part, okay, This is actually supposed to be 1 plus some transformation, okay? But actual rotation is cos theta sin theta sin minus, so cos theta minus sin theta cos theta, okay? Now suppose you take theta small, okay? Then cos theta is like 1, okay? So that is that 1 sitting outside. 1 plus sin theta for small theta will be theta, okay? So minus sin theta will be minus theta, and some plus sin theta will be just theta. So you write down this quantity, total infinitesimal transformation as 1 plus theta times this matrix. Okay.
We still have to exponentiate it, right?
Oh, that is a finite transformation.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, true. But these are generators, so they do infinitesimal transformation. When you exponentiate, then it does finite transformation. Okay, so that's why these are called algebra elements, and they are the exponential quantities are called group elements.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So what we have learned in the process of doing this is that if you want to do a representation theory of 4-dimensional rotation group, okay, you don't need to do anything. Why? Because in different choice of basis, see, representation theory is independent of choice of basis. Okay, you can choose any convenient basis to do representation theory. So let's choose J and K basis to do representation theory, and we have already done that. Ordered pair of half integral, positive half integral numbers. Okay, those are the representations. The correct basis to see rotation symmetry in 4 dimensions is M and N basis. Okay, whose Lie algebra looks complicated. Okay, looks like this, but its representation theory is no different from representation in theory of J and K. Okay, and therefore 4-dimensional rotation group representation theory is just 2 copies of SU2 algebra. Period. Okay. To put it differently, a rotation in 4 dimensions, so remember rotations are orthogonal transformations, right? Right, because those are the transformations which leave the rotate the vector but leave the norm of the vector constant. Okay, so the algebra that we have written down here, this is an algebra of rotations in 4 dimensions, and it's called SO4. Okay, maybe I have written it further down. Okay, so this is algebra of orthogonal matrices. You can see that these are kind of elementary pieces of orthogonal matrices. Okay, and that is a 4-dimensional rotation group whose Lie algebra is SO4. Okay, but as I said, that given that this basis is related to J and K by just change of linear combination, this thing, so representation theory of SO4 is same as the representation theory of K and J and K algebra, which is just 2 copies of SU2 algebra. Okay, that tells us that 4-dimensional rotation group is isomorphic to SU2 plus SU2 algebra. Okay, so small SO4 algebra is same as SU2 plus SU2 algebra. Okay, so one thing we have just learned without doing much exercise, that that one particular Lie group, namely SO4, is nothing but just 2 copies of SU2 algebras. Okay, so this is something I said, that the representations are independent of choice of basis. Okay, fine. So I have already overshot by 5 minutes, but can I take another 5 minutes? We'll do the Lorentz thing. Unless you have to go somewhere, we can kind of come back to it then. Should I go ahead or not?
Can you go back to
Yeah.
the accommodation relation page?
This one?
Yeah, what Taman was asking was in the third accommodation. No. Okay. Yeah, it is fine. Fine.
It's fine. Okay. So can I take few minutes to kind of just do the Lorentz thing?
Yeah. Also, one thing,
Yeah.
you said SO4 is SU2 plus SU2.
SU2 plus SU2, yeah.
Isn't it the cross zone?
Oh, a group is cross. SO4 is SU2 cross SU2 as a group. As algebra, the elements add, no? In the group, the elements multiply.
All right.
Okay. So that's why small letters. If I had written capital letters, I would have written tensor product. Okay, so let's go ahead. Okay, fine. So in other words, SO4 can be labeled as just ordered pair of SO2 representation. So we know completely what is the representation theory of SO4 algebra without doing any work. Okay, well, by realizing, of course, that they can be written in terms of J and K form, normally you would have landed up with M and N form as a SO4 algebra, but by taking appropriate linear combination, you go to J and K form, and then you realize that that is just 2 copies of SO2 and your job is done instantly. Okay, fine. Okay, so now of course we know how to write down the angular momentum generators in 3D in terms of differential operator, like x del del y minus y del del x. One could do the same for 4D. And if you do that, then you can realize that if you do a 3-dimensional parity transformation, 3 generators transform like vector and 3 transform like pseudo vector. Okay, but I have not written them down. If you want, I could add them to these notes later. Okay, but yeah, it's not important for Lorentz algebra. Okay, so let's try to look at the symmetry algebra for the space time. That consists of 2 sets of generators. One are P mu, which are translation generators, and then there are Lorentz transformation generators, which are M mu nu, which contains Lorentz boost and Lorentz rotation. Are you used to this notation or not?
We were using it in QM2.
You were using it in QM2, right? So P mu is of course kind of easy. It's just kind of in quantum mechanics, it will be like a momentum operator, which does infinitesimal translation. But M mu nu is antisymmetric in mu nu, and mu nu take 4 values. So antisymmetric in second rank tensor in 4 dimensions would have 6 component. Okay, so 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 1, 2, 1, 3, and 2, 3. Okay, of which 1, 2, 1, 3, and 2, 3 are spatial indices which corresponds to rotations, and 0, 1, 0, 2, and 0, 3 are Lorentz boosts, which makes time with space. Okay, which are what are called Lorentz boosts. Okay, fine. And the algebra, of course, is much more messy, written in this particular form. Okay, what we are actually going to concentrate is only on this last commutational relation. Okay, so we can just set translations to 0 just for the time being, because we want to look at Lorentz algebra representation theory. Translation representation theory just adds momentum to every representation that you have. Okay, so you can forget it for the time being. Okay, good. So whatever I said just now is this statement that if you want to look at the rotation generators RA, you can write them in terms of MBC as half of epsilon ABC MBC. Okay, where ABC takes 0, 1, sorry, 1, 2, 3 value only, mu takes 0, 1, 2, 3, ABC take 1, 2, 3. And BA are the boost transformations, where one of the direction is time direction and the other direction is space direction. Okay, so BA is M0A. So let's do the following thing. Okay, let's do a complex linear combination of these generators. These are rotations and these are boosts. Okay, now the algebra is written out here. We know eta, which is just Minkowski metric. M mu nu are the generators which you can, by substituting appropriate value, you can write in terms of RAs and BAs. Okay. Now you take
I think
J
there's a
plus.
plus or minus sign missing in the algebra that you wrote.
There.
In the bracket.
Oh
There
yeah,
are
yeah,
two-
here, no?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. Thank you. I'll correct it. Yeah, that's kind of stupid. Of course, you can't have a quadratic term in the Lie algebra. Thanks. Yeah, I should remember to correct that. Okay, so so now we write down a complex linear combination JA is equal to RA plus I times BA. If you take plus or minus, you just write down plus or minus. Take the old algebra, write it in terms of RA and BA, substitute it here and compute. And you find JA plus JB plus gives you JC plus. JA minus with JB minus gives you JC minus. and JA plus commutes to JB minus. Okay, that means you have again got two copies of SU2 algebras. Okay, and these two copies of SU2 algebras don't talk to each other. Okay, so therefore you can study the representation theory of these two SU2 algebras independent of each other. Okay, in other words, Lorentz algebra representation theory in this choice of basis is exactly same as the SO4 representation theory. Okay, or two copies of SO2 representation theory. Okay, in other words, we would represent Lorentz algebra uh, representations in terms of ordered pairs, taking values which are half integral, positive half integral values, starting of course from 0 plus positive half integral value. Done. No further study needs to be done with finite dimensional representation of Lorentz algebra. Okay, so we already know what that is. Okay, because we have again landed up with two copies of angular momentum algebra. Okay, so we are going to represent them in terms of J plus and J minus ordered pair. I should have put a bracket around this, but yeah. Okay, exactly the way we wrote down rho and sigma for SO4. Now we write them in terms of J plus and J minus. Okay, now only difference now is that because these are space-time transformations, every representation has to be given a space-time meaning as against the group theoretic meaning that SO4 we gave, that 0 is kind of trivial representation and half 0 is a spin half representation of J and spin 0 representation of K. In case of Lorentz algebra, it becomes more interesting now. Okay, what is the meaning of this? Okay, if you look at a 0 representation, J minus plus is 0, J minus is 0, then it is Lorentz invariant because it doesn't transform under either J plus or J minus. Okay, if it doesn't transform under these, it doesn't transform under any way you write down Lorentz generators. Okay, that quantity is what we call a scalar. Okay, if it transforms as half with respect to J plus and 0 with respect to J minus, then we call it a left chirality spin-off. Okay, this is just a convention. You could have called it a right chirality spin-off, but it doesn't matter. Okay, pure convention. Okay, and it is denoted as psi alpha, and it's a two-component spin-off. Okay, instead of that, if you looked at 0 half, then it is a right chirality spin-off and is denoted as chi alpha dot, which is chi1 dot chi2 dot. Okay, notice the difference. The half 0 is a undotted index and 0 half is a dotted index. Okay, something very important. Uh, this is a convention. Anybody would probably later on go in the particle physics or string theory direction would be doing this, like, it's like everyday job in some sense. Okay, so it is important to remember that a dotted spinor, okay, is right chirality spinor, and undotted spinor is left chirality spinor. Okay, now as I said that this is pure convention, so every time if you look up a book or a paper or something, that fellow has to define right in the beginning whether the author is referring to half 0 as left chirality or right chirality. Okay, but once that convention is fixed, okay, the book or the paper would follow that convention all through. Okay, if that author fails to do that, then the paper is essentially unreadable. Okay, fine. So I think I have done it up to here only, but I can tell you a few more things. Okay, and the few more things are the following: that these left chirality spinor and right chirality spinor are also called Weil spinors. Okay, and Weil spinor is a solution to the Dirac equation when the mass term is 0. Okay, when the mass term is 0, you can show that the Dirac equation can be decomposed into two-component form, and that the two-component equation has these two possible solutions. Okay, which is called a left chiral Weil spinor and a right chiral Weil spinor. Okay, and therefore Dirac spinor itself is actually written as a combined representation half 0 plus 0 half. Okay, half 0 plus 0 half, remember. Okay, and so therefore I just didn't get time. I just managed to type up to this, but that is the point. Okay, so Dirac spinor is half 0 plus 0 half, and that is why it is a 4-component thing. Okay, if upper component is a left chirality spinor, then the lower component is a right chirality spinor, or vice versa. Okay, and that is the reason Why Lorentz algebra representation theory would tell you that if you look at a non-chiral Fermi spinor representation, which is what the Dirac spinor is, then it better be half zero plus zero half, and therefore it is should necessarily be a 4-component object. Okay, so that is how.
Did you say the last statement?
That if you are looking at a spinor, what's called a non-chiral spinor, this has one chirality, this has opposite chirality. If you are looking at a spinor which has no specific chirality, then it should necessarily have a left chiral plus right chiral in it, and therefore it should necessarily be a 4-component thing. Okay, and Dirac spinor is a non-chiral spinor. Okay, and therefore it should necessarily be a 4-component solution. Okay, and that is how that is the way it bones out in the Dirac equation anyway. Okay, so before I close, I just want to tell you one more thing, that the next representation that you could look at is what is called the half-half representation. Okay, and the half-half representation is actually a vector. Okay, space-time vector. Okay, so it would be a good exercise for you to just check how half-half representation is space-time vector. Of course, if you open any book, it will tell you how half-half representation would work out to be. Any quantum field theory book would have it. Okay, typically in the quantum field theory book, if you look at the appendix where conventions are defined, they would explain all this. Okay, but yeah, you can look up also. I mean, like, it doesn't matter. Okay, so this is it. So Lorentz algebra representation theory is can be just trivialized by taking appropriate suitable linear combination of rotation and boost such that you get two sets of SU2 algebra generators which do not talk to each other. By that I mean they commute with each other. Okay. Then all Lorentz algebra representations are written in terms of ordered pairs of SU2 representation theory. Job done. Okay. So I think I'll stop here. If you have any questions, if you think I went fast, we could kind of revisit these things. I would probably type in few more few more things just to kind of make sense of some of these representations, but not too much anyway. Otherwise, like I would be typing mostly Lorentz algebra representation theory instead of doing something else. Okay. So, but like, please feel free to kind of ask questions in case something is not clear. Okay, but I intend to get back to our Dirac equation because at some point we'll have to actually start doing atomic physics. So we are still doing relativistic quantum mechanics actually.
Sir?
Yes.
Here we can, as is pointed out, we can have any half integer spin in the first component of the ordered pair and in the second of the ordered pair, right?
Yes.
Independent of each other.
Yes, yes.
But do each of those correspond to something like half zero plus zero half corresponds to particle and antiparticle electron, like a half spin half?
Yeah, Dirac spinor, for example. Yeah.
And half you said corresponds to vector.
Yeah, like photon. Photon is half representation, say.
Maybe something like 1 0 plus 0 1 also means some particle.
Yes. Yeah. So 1 0 and 0 1 are supposed to be self-dual and anti-self-dual antisymmetric tensors.
Okay. But for arbitrary s comma rho plus rho comma s, like what would that mean? It's a particle or what?
Yeah. So in principle they can be particles, but they have not been observed in the nature. Okay. So for example, self-dual antisymmetric tensor and anti-self-dual antisymmetric tensors are useful. I'll probably put in those notes at some point. Like for example, if you want to ask how does the spinor transform under Lorentz transformation, okay, spinor carries a spinor index, right, alpha or alpha dot, whereas m carries mu nu indices, right? So therefore, m doesn't act on the spinor directly. M has to have a different representation so that it acts on a spinor. Those matrices are the matrices which are antisymmetric tensors because M is antisymmetric. They are antisymmetric tensors, but they are of specific kind. If they act on alpha beta indices, it is self-dual. If it acts on alpha dot beta dot indices, it is anti-self-dual. Okay. So those representations are useful for transforming the quantities that we know. But in the nature, we have only seen scalars, spin half particles, and spin one particles. Okay. If you do a theory of gravity, then you have, of course, spin 3 supergravity, suppose, then you have spin 3 half and spin 2 also. But we haven't observed them yet. Of course, we have seen gravity waves, so good reason to believe graviton would exist, which is spin 2. But at least in flat space-time, or let's put it this way, at least in asymptotically flat space-time, okay, that means if you allow gravity to have generate some curvature inside, but not asymptotically, in all those asymptotically flat space-time, only consistent set of theories that you can hope to write down are theories with spin up to 2. That means up to graviton. If you go beyond that, you can show that the theories are going to get sick and difficult to even define interacting theories. Of course, you can write down free theories, but free theories, as we argued somewhere else, that free theories are kind of, you can write down a free action which doesn't talk to anybody. Then it doesn't matter really. Okay, if it doesn't even talk to gravity, then such objects are totally useless. Okay, our interest would be to have a theory which is interacting, and there is a theorem due to, I think, Fronsdal, that you cannot have interacting theory with higher spin fields in a space which is asymptotically flat. Okay, but if you have asymptotic geometry different, instead of it being flat Minkowski space, it is some anti-de Sitter space or some such stuff, then you can have higher spin fields. Okay, but yeah, we are not going there, in at least not in quantum mechanics course. Okay, so but even if you are doing that kind of space, then the algebra is not Lorentz algebra anyway. It has a different algebra. That theory has some anti-de Sitter algebra, and you look at a representation theory of that algebra. So whatever statement that we make about Lie algebra representation theories don't apply there anyway. Okay, so that is the status, that we have seen only spin 0, half, 1. We believe that things will make sense up to spin 2. There exists a theorem which says anything above that wouldn't have a non-trivial interacting theory in asymptotically flat space. But purely mathematically, of course, you can do a representation theory of Lorentz algebra with arbitrary spins and study them.
No, sir, I was asking you this question last time.
Yeah.
Could like massless particles be composite?
No.
Because like
See,
if,
massless, yeah, please.
yeah, if like they are made out of some two interacting particles, then that would give the massless